Back before Christmas, I talked a little bit about the challenges of talking about modern franchise streaming shows, where the nature of streaming storytelling tends to be light up front and heavy in the rear, so it's hard to tell what a show like, say, The Acolyte is meaningfully about without seeing the entire season, but also, by the time that anybody's actually seen the entire season, the show has evaporated from the zeitgeist on Contact. I was speaking specifically in the context of Skeleton Crew, so when we decided to release a bonus episode of The Backdrop to shift us back to our regular fortnightly schedule, we thought it might be worth following up on that. Now that we've had a chance to see Skeleton Crew in its entirety, what was the show actually and meaningfully about? So that's what we're going to talk about this week. It will involve discussing the show in detail, complete with spoilers for the finale, but it's been out for a few weeks now, so you probably had time to see it if you want to. That said, if you want to pause, watch the show and come back, feel free to do so. Make no bones about it, this video is going to be something of a skeleton key. From its beginnings, Skeleton Crew was interesting as an example of pop culture nostalgia. The show blends George Lucas' science fantasy framework with the 1980s children's film popularized by Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, effectively pitching itself as Star Wars meets Stranger Things.
We would be honored if you would join us.
However, that's an aesthetic, it's not really a theme. As the show progressed, it evolved into something more interesting and more complicated. In particular, Skeleton Crew feels like a very broad and very generalized exploration of what Star Wars is and has become over the past decade. In some ways, the series plays as a sort of commentary on Disney's management of the Star Wars brand following their purchase of Lucasfilm in October 2012. It makes sense that Skeleton Crew would be reflective. After all, it is the last of the current wave of Star Wars streaming shows. The first rumblings about the show emerged in February 2022. This was at the height of the streaming boom, just months before what would be described as the Great Netflix Correction of July 2022. Just 1 year later, in July 2023, Disney CEO Bob Iger would acknowledge that the studio planned to, quote, pull back on producing Star Wars and Marvel content. Over the past couple of years, Disney has pivoted away from streaming and back towards theatrical. The only other live-action Star Wars streaming shows on the docket are the second and final season of Andor, and a second season of Ahsoka. Although it's hard to identify such a moment without the benefit of hindsight, Skeleton Crew might represent the end of an era for Disney's management of the Star Wars brand. It is the last evidence of the company's aggressive expansion to streaming, treating the medium as a new frontier that it could colonize with existing intellectual properties. The basic plot of the show follows 4 children who are whisked away from their sheltered lives on the planet Aten to embark on an adventure through a strange and hostile galaxy. Wim, Fern, KB, and Neil.
My guts!
God damn it, is Neil's part one of the best aesthetic decisions the Star Wars franchise has made in a very long time? These 4 kids end up aligned with a rogue who goes by the alias Jod Nanawood, played by Jude Law, and the droid SM-33. Which is an obvious allusion to Smee. When footage from Skeleton Crew first premiered, there was something of a minor controversy over the portrayal of At-Aten. True to the influence of movies like The Goonies or E.T. or Mac and Me, At-Aten is presented as a sort of space suburbia. It is markedly different from any other planet that has ever appeared in live-action Star Wars before, a world of school buses and white picket fences. Obviously, Star Wars has always had a very retro 1950s aesthetic, populated with diners and hot rods, so a suburban planet makes a certain amount of sense. However, At-Aten didn't stand out because it was a throwback. It stood out because it was mundane. The planet was dull and boring. It was a planet of the galactic middle class, of office workers and administrators just going about their business. Wim obviously longed to escape At-Aten, just as Luke Skywalker wanted to leave Tatooine, but Wim would have been leaving behind a much more comfortable and much less grim existence. Whether intentionally or not, At-Aten feels like a perfect commentary for what Star Wars has become under Disney. Star Wars used to be an event. A new Star Wars movie was a defining pop culture moment. However, under Disney's stewardship, what was once rare and infrequent became regular and routine. Star Wars ceased to be special, it became ordinary and generic. We've used the term before and it's very evocative, but yes, this was cultural fracking. It is perhaps notable that the suburbia of Skeleton Crew is underpinned by an almost religious reverence for the great work.
Tell the Undersecretary how you would like to contribute to the great work.
Oh.
Yes, Runa.
More Darren Mooney.
In this sense, It evokes Walt Disney's original vision for Epcot as a planned utopian community, not just a housing development, but an expression of Disney's ideology. It was Suburbia, but Suburbia with slightly cultish undertones. Of course, that vision of Epcot was never actually realized, and it instead became a theme park, but don't worry, we'll circle back to that point. The finale of Skeleton Crew reveals that At-Aten is not governed by a person or even a group, but instead by a sentient computer. It's hard not to read this, like the jokey framing of the Kevin Feige robot at the end of She-Hulk, as a commentary on how algorithmic the managing of these sorts of properties has become under Disney. In this context, it's worth noting that Skeleton Crew is overseen by John Watts and his long-term creative partner, Christopher Ford. Watts' first film was Cop Car, an Amblin-esque adventure starring Kevin Bacon, but his next 3 films were a trilogy of Spider-Man movies within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is a filmmaker who has worked very literally inside the machine. Building on this premise, Skeleton Crew becomes a meditation on what Star Wars has become. Within the world of Skeleton Crew, everything has been mythologized. It is about fables. Wim obsesses over the tales of the knights. Jod regales the children with stories whispered by pirates. In that sense, it's hard for Skeleton Crew not to be about Star Wars, which Lucas himself described as, quote, a modern-day fairy tale. Over the course of the show's run, the kids stop at various planets. These planets have secret histories that have been covered up and plastered over. At one point, for example, they end on At-Akron, another planet that was, quote, co-founded with At-Aten. It is a mirror of the suburban bliss that the children have known, a world locked in a state of perpetual warfare as factions deface monuments and tear each other to pieces. It is perhaps a metaphor for what it feels like to talk about Star Wars online, and look, you can probably venture into the comments section to get a taste of that. Then SM33 guides the children to an old pirate world that has gone by names like the Demon's Rest and Battle World. SM33 promises to take the children to the lair of famed pirate Captain Tack Renaud, a lone mountain where bubbling pits of mud hide the mangled corpses of the captain's foes. However, the droid is shocked when they are greeted upon arrival by a pleasure yacht. The planet has been turned into a luxury resort, Lanupa. SM33 is grossly offended by the gentrification of his old home, where the fighting pits have been turned into a sensory gymnasium, and the lair that Renaud carved straight into the mountain rock has been remodeled as the spa. Everything is gentler, softer, kinder than SM33 remembers. All the rough edges of the planet have been sanded off, replaced with cushions and pillows. Lanupa has become a retreat for the galaxy's upper classes. Even the warning that children are not permitted on Lanupa recalls ongoing debates about how Disney should deal with adults who want to enjoy the luxury of its resorts without being bothered by children. However, Lanupa also offers a broader commentary on the Star Wars franchise. It represents the conversion of what was once an outlaw haven to something much more corporate. Star Wars was the creation of George Lucas and his collaborators, a deeply strange and personal work that broke many of the rules of how films could and should be made. This approach even extends to the prequels. The Phantom Menace was described in contemporary press as the most ambitious independent movie ever made. This reading makes sense. Pirates have long existed as metaphors for artists. This was the central thematic thrust of Gore Verbinski's Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, which found the pirates and buccaneers of the Seven Seas gradually brought to heel by the capitalist machinations of the East India Trading Company. Lucas and his fellow movie brats must have seemed like pirates as they swept through the New Hollywood of the 1970s. That said, it is perhaps also worth acknowledging that pirates themselves are part of the larger Disney brand. The studio has a long history of pirate movies spanning literal decades. One of its most famous theme park rides is built around pirates. The company has expanded that ride into a multi-billion-dollar franchise focusing on pirates. Hell, just 1 year before Skeleton Crew premiered, Jude Law played a live-action version of one of the company's iconic pirates in David Lowery's Peter Pan and Wendy. And don't worry, I forgot that too. Perhaps these pirates are just another reminder of the Disneyfication of Star Wars. Under Disney, Star Wars has become much more corporatized and much more anonymous. It's no longer guided and shaped by artists, but dictated by the demands of shareholders. The studio has a habit of parting ways with creators, and endings are often reworked and reconfigured. Like the remodeled Lanupa, modern Star Wars perhaps exists primarily for the satisfaction of the banking clan. This reframes the larger show. Much of Skeleton Crew is about the idea that the Star Wars universe is particularly hostile to children. Wim is ignored and neglected on At-Aten. Children are employed as foot soldiers on At-Akron. Kids are banned from Lanupa. At various points, the children are threatened and cajoled. They are never made to feel like they belong or that they should be included. They're often treated as a hindrance or a burden. To put it simply, the Star Wars universe as presented in Skeleton Crew is not a welcoming place for children. This perhaps reflects the franchise's aging fan base, the increasingly worrying sense that Star Wars belongs exclusively to fans in their 40s or 50s. This obviously raises questions about the long-term viability of the brand, but it also clashes with George Lucas's repeated assertion that Star Wars is, quote, a film for 12-year-olds.
It's a film for 12-year-olds.
All this fits with the revelation of why Jod is so eager to take the kids back to Adatin. It turns out that the bland suburbia of Adatin is home to, quote, the last Old Republic mint.
An Old Republic mint.
It's a mint again?
It's where they make money.
One imagines that Bob Iger feels exactly the same way about Lucasfilm. As such, Skeleton Crew feels like a meditation on the current state of the Star Wars brand, and the various tensions simmering through it. To bring us full circle, it is perhaps the skeleton key to understanding what exactly is happening within the Star Wars franchise. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.